This is Self-Starter. Hi folks, welcome to Self-Starter, a podcast that highlights the small business owners, the self-employed and freelancers who have taken the plunge to create their own desirable lifestyle. My name is Andy Dowling. I'm also the host of the Andy Social Podcast, bass player for the Australian metal band Lord, and I'm also a dispute resolution specialist. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook by searching @Andy Dowling, or you can head on over to selfstarter.com.au where you can learn more about yours truly and anything and everything to do with the self-employment world. Before we kick into the episode, I must give a quick update regarding the 2018 Australian Podcast Awards that were held in Melbourne on the 5th of May. Now, for people that have been listening to the Self-Starter podcast for a while will know that I was fortunate enough to be named a finalist for Host of the Year for the Podcast Awards this year. And I went down to Melbourne and attended the festivities, and unfortunately I didn't take out the award. Damn. But I was just incredibly fortunate and happy to be a part of what is growing in a medium and a format. And there's so many people that are creating amazing content now. And I must say a massive thanks to Dave and Anna from the Australian Podcast Awards who have put on the event. And I can definitely see this getting bigger and better each and every year. To Lush Content Agency, who were the sponsor of the Host of the Year category. To Timbo Reid, who was Timbo Reid from the Small Business Big Marketing podcast, who hosted the event and emceed the whole thing. And I must say also massive congratulations to Book Who's Talking, who actually won the Host of the Year category this year. So massive congratulations to you guys for winning. And also a congrats to the other finalists who were Movie Magoo's Film Reviews, Word for Word, Snag Says, and Reality Check, who were the other finalists, including yours truly as well. So just an amazing night. I was really, really fortunate to be a part of it, and to get right to that last point where I almost took out the award is just really, really cool. And I'm more inspired than ever to continue to build this podcast, the Andy Social Podcast, and just be more and more involved in the podcast medium here in Australia. So just absolutely fantastic, great night, and more motivated than ever to keep making this bigger and better. This episode is with Sid Green of MonoNest Studio, located in Sanctuary Point down the south coast of New South Wales. Now, Sid is a freelance musician and music producer who's been recording artists down the south coast for around 10 years or so. MonoNest Studio, the name itself, has been around for almost 20 years, but Sid moved down the south coast about 10 years ago and actually set up his bricks and mortar studio that he does a lot of his recording out of. Sid's background in music is extensive, and most notably, he's played in bands such as Mantissa and Iota in the 90s, and these days plays in a band called 1920. This episode in particular is an edited down and focused version of a longer chat that I had with Sid that's featured on episode 124 of the Andy Social Podcast. In this episode specifically, you're going to hear more of a focus around MonoNest Studio and the evolution of his business, and also the approach that he takes with his clients and artists that he works with. If you want to learn more about some of his earlier days as a musician, some of the great Mantissa stories, and a lot more music talk, then go and check out 124 of the Andy Social Podcast over at andysocial.net. And I'll also have a link to that episode in the show notes of this episode over at selfstarter.com.au. Now, you can find Sid and MonoNest Studio by going to sidgreen.com.au, or you can search for MonoNest on Facebook as well. Those links will be in the show notes also. Now, you might think that a music producer in a studio won't draw a lot of parallels in your own self-employment journey. However, I really, really encourage you guys to listen with an open mind. The great thing about Self-Starter is that it's all about sharing best practices across all types of industries and professions. This encourages innovation and a point of difference in your own little pond. And as always, in true Self-Starter fashion, you'll hear my key takeaways at the end of this episode that you might be able to consider and apply with what you do. But for now though, please enjoy this chat with Sid Green of MonoNest Studio. Sid, thank you very much for letting me come over and check out your digs. Pretty impressive setup that you got here.
Welcome to the MonoNest, as they say.
Absolutely. Do you want to give a brief introduction of who you are in the business?
Yeah, sure. I'm a freelance musician and record producer, which entails many different hats.
Yeah.
And usually wearing them at the same time. Yeah. So, I'm in almost a full-time touring band as well. So and have a recording studio that's going pretty much 8 days a week in Nowra.
Wow.
That's currently
Just full on. So there's always something going on.
There's always something going on, and it's amazing. I'm pinching myself daily, you know, so it's great.
And how long's MonoNest been up and running as a name, as a business
thing?
itself, as a thing? Yeah.
Yeah, I could almost say maybe 16 years. Yeah. My first sort of co-producing sort of gig that I got, if you'd call it that, was I was playing in a band called Iota, and we ended up sort of co-producing our first sort of record, and that really just launched my career as that sort of thing, as being a producer, and that was 1998.
It's gone back a while now.
It's 20 years, right? I just did the math. So you could potentially say it's been a 20-year production. And then, of course, cutting your teeth before that by being a musician and seeing the happenings of how to make records. And then it goes right back to that. There wasn't computers. Well, there was a very big computer for an SSL to do automation, but, you know, there wasn't email. It was tape. You were splicing tape.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how that was the medium we used, and it was normal.
Yeah.
That was just like, how are we going to record?
Yeah.
You know? So it's been really great to come from that and see it build.
Incredible. So, I mean, you mentioned sort of 98 was around that time that you really started getting into like production.
Yeah.
You would have at the time had other people to leverage off to try and learn, because I think I was reading on your website you had a couple of people that sort of acted, you know, maybe as
mentors?
slight mentors, and they seem to be slightly notable people.
They're very notable
people. So.
Yeah. Oh, look, incredible. I mean, my biggest mentor and dear friend, Michael Letho.
Yep.
He works for Rockwiz now.
Yeah.
So he's the full-time Rockwiz guy, but before that he's worked on Rush albums and Daryl Braithwaite, all these amazing artists of the 80s and 90s. And then we ended up working on a Mantissa record.
Yeah.
And that's how the friendship built from that, watching him engineer and produce those records, and then we just hit it off on a technical level as well, and he was so willing to share everything he had.
Obviously, when you're going through that period of learning and sort of absorbing as much as you can, you've got these great people around you that are giving all their experience to you. I did read that you had done a lot of work with different recording studios around the place, and some really world famous studios.
Terry Date as well, who produced Soundgarden, Pantera, Limp Bizkit. Deftones, like all these incredible bands of the 90s, like amazing. And I probably learnt the most valuable lesson from him in engineering, and that was the people skills.
Yeah, right, okay. Get the most out of people.
Well, yeah, and understanding what people need and how they can achieve it. I watched firsthand a master. Not only was he a technical master as well, the most fascinating thing about Terry was he's not a musician. Couldn't play anything, and I think that really gave him the edge. Yeah, because he didn't have any personal sort of.
There's no attachment to
to anything. It's like he doesn't favour the guitar because he's a guitar player or drums. And even more so, it was like, how do I describe it? It's like, this full detachment. And really all he had was the science and how to make people behave in a way. Manipulate's not the right word, but
Sort of coaching people
Yeah,
to
it's just
get them in their optimal,
their best headspace, without even knowing it.
Yeah.
The real art.
Around that sort of time, sort of late 90s, and you're working with all these, great people in these studios, were you working as like a freelancer and coming into those studios, or were you employed by those studios at the time? What did it sort of look like at that stage?
The late 90s was really interesting time because, so we're talking about the whole studios and analog equipment. I mean, I think 97, 98, you had the first sort of really great, decent Macintosh that was big enough to, or PC as well, but that was sort of big enough to record some audio. And then they had the Pro Tools DigiDesign sort of interfaces that were coming out. And that really meant if you could get set up with something like that, you were recording at home, great sample rate, and it hadn't been done before, really. And it meant you didn't have to go into a studio and watch the clock.
Yep.
And go, oh my goodness, this is costing, 301's not cheap.
Yeah.
Amazing though. Like you get every bang for your buck at that place. But you know what I mean? The clock ticks there, and it's, you got to question what you spend time on. So all of a sudden that was gone. You could spend, well, I think we spent 9 months making that Iota record.
Yeah.
So because we had lots of time.
Yeah.
So that's where I saw this amazing shift. And I didn't realise it at the time, but I was forging a way with the times changing where I was going into a profession of saying, hey, if I can do this for myself and an artist that I was collaborating with, well, I could do this for anyone.
So even at that stage, you were ready to do it as just you, not you working for a larger business and being just a paid gun that comes in.
Yeah.
You were your own, a freelancer.
A freelance,
a contractor to be able to come in and help out and deal with one artist, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's when it started to really sort of. I finished that record, and I think, some calls started. Well, Iota was signed to MGM, so I think I remember getting a couple of sort of small, like EP type recording jobs from MGM because they liked what we did with Iota, and next thing you know, I got a couple of other sort of gigs where I wasn't connected musically in any way. It was just, I was purely producing and making records for the artists.
When did the name come in?
MonoNest?
Was that relocating down here? Was that when it came, or did you already have it sort of floating around beforehand?
I sort of had it floating around. I've always loved the word monaural.
Yeah.
And if you probably can't tell by now that I'm a big lover of birds.
Yeah.
And, things are born in the nest.
Yep.
And it's those two analogies really, come together for me, and that's where the names come from. And I guess too, as you sort of drifting along in this world, you're sort of accumulating things like microphones and outboard equipment and speakers. You get down, you finish something one week and go, I'd really love that microphone. I think it'd sound great on the drum kit. And you're just slowly accumulating pieces of equipment and instruments, drums, and next thing you know,
you've got a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Go, oh, wow. I could actually,
wow.
Yeah.
It's 20 years of collecting based on the things you like and the sounds, and then you need a place to put it. And it just happens to look like a music studio,
And how long have you been in Sanctuary Point now?
10 years.
10 years.
Yeah. My wife's an artist as well, a visual artist. So we've had a few breaks where we've spent some time overseas, living overseas, and then have come home. We've done that twice now, so we sort of haven't been here the whole time, and that's been great.
So 10 years ago, moving here and setting up, and 10 years ago would have been even worse than what any of the stereotypes are now, because I know that, from where Sydney is to here, we're about 2.5 hours away.
Yeah,
probably.
ballpark.
Yeah. And it's easier to get down the coast these days. The roads are a little bit better.
Yeah, sure is.
But 10 years ago, I mean, you're setting up a business for yourself.
Yep.
Where all the work normally would be in Sydney or in a capital city, anywhere in the country, and you're moving into an area that's a very chilled, beautiful part of the world.
Yes.
That's so chilled, quiet. How did you adjust, or how did you go through the process of going, all right, I've got to bring money in, I've got to start a business down here or keep my business going? What sort of things did you have to do in those early stages?
Well, I think we could go straight back to what I was saying about the studios. Well, there's studios down here too, but in the capital cities are expensive, and you're usually looking at the clock. So I think what's happened for me, and it was just this really great window where people were tired of going into a dark, dingy studio and trying to be creative under fluoro lights and watching a clock tick, right? And I think people were tired of that. And then all of a sudden you have computer-based medium where you could essentially record anywhere.
Yeah.
Which meant, hey, wait a minute, I could sit on a nice couch, chill out, and make some music. Why would I even consider going into a studio, right? That's where the window opened.
Yep.
It was almost like I said, hey, I've got a place down the coast. Get out of Sydney. Get out of the rat race. Calm down. Unwind. Relax. Be creative. That was the window, right? And in some ways, I sort of saw it happening. Well, that Iota record was done just out of Kiama.
Yep. Okay.
Similar vibe.
Yep.
And I saw that like very early 90s when I recorded at John Farnham's studio, which was on 10 acres in the Dandenong Hills of Melbourne. Beautiful. Like, it felt like you were in another world, you know? It wasn't the city type thing. And don't get me wrong, like, I also think the city has this beautiful charm and energy as well. But, it just depends on the style, right? If you're doing sort of like indie rock stuff, you're not going to go to a farmhouse and
that's it. That's not the vibe.
It's not the vibe, right? So all of a sudden the window was, I was the guy that produced Iota's stuff, which was very singer-songwriter, or a little bit rock, but a little bit mostly folk singer-songwriter acoustic. I started getting those style of players, which really meant isolation, tranquility, all those sort of words that you would like to create. And I thought, and I was going out to this beautiful farmhouse that I go to track albums as well, which I still go to. And it's like a family friend that I rent the place from when I have a project. So I still go there. And I thought, you know what, we could really try and make it work. If I build a studio here, it'll be the same. So I know I really just took a go at it and thought, let's give it a go.
That's the big angle, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the advantage of getting away from it all and giving yourself some breathing space to be able to be creative and get the most out of the situation, and then obviously knowing what type of musicians and what type of music is going to benefit from those settings, as opposed to somebody else that probably needs the city energy to be able to get the most out of them.
Exactly.
So identifying the right people for the business.
That's it, man. Totally. And that's when of course you build something like this in your home, and you're almost halving the costs.
Yep, overheads are lower. Yeah,
as well, but also for the artist. So for an artist in Sydney going, well, should I go to 301 or should I go down to Sid? You know, there's, you know, okay, Sid's half the cost because he lives down that far. It's going to be chilled, great. You know, next thing you know, I'm the one getting the call, which is really amazing, you know, really fantastic.
So, I mean, keeping in mind that, you know, the advantages is not having the clock there, not having that time pressure.
Yeah.
Having some form of schedule, of course, to be able to work through whatever needs to be done. But what would you, I mean, you're providing a facility, gear, expertise, everything to make it happen. But, I mean, for someone to travel here, would they stay in the area somewhere? What would you sort of do to support them, or is it something that they would sort out themselves? Like, how does that work to entice people down here?
Yeah, look, well, Airbnb's been amazing, right? So there's a lot around here because it's quite touristy.
Yep.
Touristy in the summer.
Yeah.
In the wintertime, you won't see anyone here really. Yeah. Particularly I'm in the lakes just across the road, so it can get pretty sort of cold when the wind blows off the water, which is great for making music.
I was going to say that adds another dynamic altogether.
Yeah. So, look, Airbnb's been really great, but since I've been here, there's been holiday rentals here the whole time, and I've usually helped someone find one, and over the years you get to know all the locals, and so yeah, I'm constantly pointing artists in the right direction.
Love it.
Particularly if they've got a band. So, you know, I'll go, oh yes, you need to call blah blah down the road. They've got a 5-bedroom house, or if it's just one artist, Airbnb.
Yeah,
you know what I mean, and that's been amazing.
I reckon it's a great. I mean, especially if I don't know what seasonal sort of work for you's like, but you know, if you were still getting a high level of work even through the colder months, it's typically all of these rental properties and all these holiday homes are empty.
Yep.
You're providing something to the local area.
Yes.
By giving them, you know, income and customers by using their properties, which would normally be empty. Yeah.
Completely empty.
I mean, taking advantage of these quieter months for everybody else. I mean, it's cool. I think it's a real advantage because, you know, any of those properties would be relatively cheaper than anywhere else.
Yep.
So once again, your overheads to record and go through that creative process are lower, but on top of that, the other things that are needed to be spent on are also cheaper because of the location as well. So overall, all of your costs are going down. So you're really taking advantage of the quiet area and what it is compared to.
And in particular for bands too, you know, there's nothing like sharing a house and then share a studio space and create music, but then go back to a house and still hang, unwind, debrief about the day. It just builds so much morale between a band and a connection that you do that for a few days consecutively, and you just see the change in people. You know, you see them, or they come in and go, I love it, you know.
It creates a story around the whole process, doesn't it?
Completely,
a beginning, middle, and end, and everything in between, the ups and downs, and people having good days, bad days, but everybody's in it together.
They're in it together, and they work and they support each other, and you really see that. It makes a record really great. And the farmhouse does that too, where we all stay in the same place. We're all cooking together. There's no television. There's no phone reception.
Yeah.
You know, all you have is the music in front of you. And by a week of that, and you feel like you've been on Mars.
Been on some health retreat or something, like a meditation retreat,
and we walk away and, you know, we'll all hug, and it's just such a beautiful connection that happens over music. creating.
And when people bond over a period of time like that, over such, like when you compare just to, everyday life, working a 9-to-5 job and things like that, it's a pretty unique experience that not everyone gets to go through. Your word of mouth off the back of that would be so strong if people have had that type of experience and they walk away so enriched from the whole experience. And of course, getting the end product as well.
Of course,
most importantly.
Hopefully. It sounds like what they wanted.
Yeah,
but
hopefully everyone's happy, ticks the boxes. But to be, I guess, impacted so deeply through that whole process, the want for them to go and tell people about it would be so much greater. So for you, I'm just having a guess here.
You've guessed.
The organic word of mouth is probably what's fueling a lot of the work that comes through to you. Man,
when I started this thing, I tried advertising. It just didn't work. You know, every job I get is recommended from someone else at every time, and occasionally it's like, oh, I heard that record and I realised you did it.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm giving you a call.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's someone saying, hey, you should call Sid. We had this great time. You know. And it really has totally been that every time. So we've met for the first time today.
Yep.
And
first impressions,
yep.
You're a very personable
great
individual. Cool. Like, getting along straight away, like we're having a great chat and like, nice guy. And looking at your stuff online,
I paid Andy to say that.
Thanks for this money getting exchanged right now. And we've spoken on the phone as well. And just like, you have an advantage where you've got people skills as well in an environment where it's really needed. You have to deal with people with different personalities. You have to try and get the best out of them. Like we were going back to, before about trying to deal with ego and all these different things and challenges and trying to get the most out of people in the situation.
Yeah.
For you being, a musician and then going through that whole journey, I only know it because I've played music, for a period of time where you're forced into social situations. You're a performer. You get on stage in front of people, so you're exposed in a way to begin with. Yeah. You're lucky because you can sit behind a bit of a drum kit.
Exactly. I can hide behind the drum kit.
But I mean, over those years, you're forced into situations time and time again at shows, recording, meeting people that like your music, people that you play with, where you have to communicate. You have to talk to people. You have to talk. You have to network.
Yep.
And all those things, no doubt, have been this long journey for you to get to a point where now, that going back to that whole word of mouth, that organic way of getting people to come in, has been this long journey of just
in critical mass, isn't it? Right,
yeah.
Where it's slowly one after the other. That's exactly right, and it's. I mean, how do you make something like that? And the only way is just start at the start and just keep chipping away at the coalface.
We've touched on it a few times along the way, is that, over the years, and no doubt it's changed in the 10 years that you've been here, but with the internet, connecting with people, you are part of this whole pitch that you have for people is to come down here.
Yeah.
No doubt with internet and being able to swap files and send files, that you're doing a lot more work that's remote now as well than you were probably 10 years ago.
Absolutely. There's some great stuff where there's an advertising company that do a lot of like jingles and stuff, and occasionally they'll write to me and say, I can't mention any names, that's all right, but it's that thing where they'll go, we need a drum track. Can you do it in an hour? Now.
Wow.
And I'm like, actually I can. I just need to put a podcast on hold 1 second. So, I mean, it's amazing.
It's cool.
It's so great. And also when maybe about 7 years ago, a Canadian friend of mine who was living in Australia, we made a record here in Australia and did some sort of tours. And he had dual citizenship and moved back to Canada. And he was like, man, I don't want to make a record with anyone else. Can I make it with you? And I'm like, dude, you live in Canada. And I said, wait a second, you know, let's try one. So I said to him, you know, go into a studio, take your guitar, put down a click track and a guitar track and a couple of vocals, send me that, and then I'll do it for you. I'll do the rest. And as you can see, I can, a bit of a multi-instrumentalist, right? So I played everything. And it was this really interesting exercise, right? Because here we are on opposite sides of the world, and I'm sort of interpreting what this song should be without saying to him all these things that I would have said if he was sitting here.
Yeah.
Dom, are we right in the right key? Or should it be a bit slower or a bit faster? Or can we cut this bit out? You know,
Yeah.
whatever, right?
Yeah.
So I've just sort of gone, okay, I'm listening to these tracks, and I'd lay down some drums and bass and some dobro and whatever else I was playing. I'd send it to him, and we've become really great friends through this whole process. And he wrote back, and he wrote something like, I don't know if I like it.
Yeah.
And I went, yeah, that's cool. No worries. I'll try something else. And then about 2 hours later, I got another email. Don't touch it. It's great. You know,
It's clicked.
Yeah. It was because it was such a contrast. Like, here we are, a great example of what we're talking about, right? So we've got singer-songwriters so embedded in what they've composed, lyrically and musically, and then I've gone and just interpreted what I thought would be the thing, and it was such a change that it took him a few listens to go, oh, I get it. But
he's got to remove himself from it first.
On initial listen, it was just so different that he couldn't get it, which I get, right?
Yeah.
And it was, we laugh about it now, which was really great. So we went on to do that record, and he said it happened every time. He'd go to the studio in the morning and do his guitar bit and send it down the line, and then I'd send it back in the evening, which would have been his morning.
Yeah.
And he'd listen and go, I don't know, within an hour, I love it. You know, and it was just, because it was just so weird. And you have to remember, like, summertime, we would have been in the middle of winter, so I was feeling the total opposite. And we ended up getting this thing that had felt so cohesive in the end that you would have just assumed we were in the same room, in the same city, same part of the world, but clearly we weren't.
It's mind-blowing. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure, like, when you first started recording in bands as a musician,
there's no way I would have thought
even
that
grasp that concept. Even now, like, and a lot more people do it, and it's becoming more common. But it's still a hard thing to wrap your head around, that, you know, people, something that I put a lot of importance on, and no doubt you do because this is your life, but from a music point of view, music is such a deep thing, and to be able to create something like that with such distance in between, and still find something together, find this common ground, and it's incredible.
It really was an amazing experience, and we and from that experience we ended up getting a soundtrack together.
Wow.
And then we made a soundtrack in the same process, and we were documenting it the whole time. Like, it was so funny. Like, he was like digging himself out of 15 feet of snow, and there I was with board shorts having a surf down at the local surf break. You know, just this juxtaposition of worlds was the thing that fed it, because he at that point he'd got some recording gear, so he was recording at home. So things were almost happening instantly, or we'd wake up in the morning and I'd have something he'd sent, or he'd wake up and there'd be a whole orchestra on the other end, you know. And we just had such a great time doing that, and the way the guys put it together as the making of it was this great collaboration where we knew each other well enough that we could work together 15,000 kilometers away from each other, you know, like it was pretty nuts.
It blows the mind that it's possible. You're fortunate because you've got the expertise, you've got the equipment, you've got everything at your fingertips, and you've got the additional advantage. Well, not even advantage because everyone else has got it. Is the connection. So you can connect with whoever it is. And putting that all together, you're in a pretty good position. And no doubt, like, you know, just using the last 10 years ago, you would have had, if you're going to percentage it, you would have had more people that are physically here going through that process. And now it might be more even keel, where it's here and also online, or whatever it might be. But it's obviously changed as the digital age is it's changed as well.
And it also means I can pick my own hours too. I can do 8 p.m. till 10 p.m, which sounds a bit crazy, but it means in the morning I may choose, you know, not to start till 12. Or I'll get up really early and do a little morning session with a cup of coffee and really buzz early with a clear head. And it's just been that's been great because you can just sort of attack something with the clearest head you can. And that's good. And that's benefits everyone.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
But even just, I mean, it's the whole point of all this stuff that we've been speaking about is the luxury of being able to work for yourself where you can dictate your hours because you know when you perform best, depending on the circumstances or whatever the job is in front of you. You know whether this is going to be a late at night job or a first thing in the morning job, or maybe there's something else that you just need to do that day that's completely unrelated.
That's right.
And it's like, let's move some stuff around so I can still do that.
I can do that.
And whereas, you know, somebody else that's doing the old school job, they can't do that. This is the structure. You got to stick to it. You've got to move your life around that. I have a bit of that in Nowra because there's business hours and things, but it's still flexible, you know. Particularly if people are travelling from Sydney, I can start later and work a bit later because they've got a 2-hour drive at the front. So, I mean, it's fabulous in that way. That's cool.
It's great.
Thank you so much.
Man, it's been wonderful.
Really cool. I'll put links up to everything.
Great. Thanks for your time.
Not a problem.
Coming out. Great. Man, what can I say?
Cool afternoon chat.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that chat with Sid Green. And if you want to learn more about Sid and MonoNest Studio, you can find Sid over at sidgreen.com.au, or you can search for MonoNest on Facebook. I will have all of Sid's links and everything that we discussed in this episode over at selfstarter.com.au. Now, as always, my key takeaways. I got 4 key takeaways from this episode. If there was something that I missed and you got something different out of this episode, I would absolutely love to hear from you. So please make contact with me through any of the social media channels at Andy Dowling or going to selfstarter.com.au and flicking me a message. Now, my key takeaways. Number 1, people skills. Technical expertise is big depending on your service, but providing that personal touch can make all of the difference between you and your competitors. Sid's focus on forming close personal relationships with the artists ensures that he's getting the most out of them, but also creating an end product and experience that's worthy of being talked about with others. Number 2, use your website as a business card. So Sid cites word of mouth as being the main driver for business rather than using any form of advertising. However, Sid's website serves as a portfolio of work and a place for those who are curious to try Sid's services to have a little bit of a sticky beak and learn about him before reaching out to make contact. So if you can start to think about your online presence as a resource and a business card, / portfolio rather than just a sales portal and a hard sell, you'll create more of a rich experience and increase that conversion for your prospective client. Number 3, collaborating globally. Sid has been able to take advantage of the digital landscape that we live in by recording with people all over the world. And now this isn't reserved to just people in the music industry. Anyone can create a business opportunity or find customers from any corner of the globe. You're not limited to your immediate area anymore. We need to think beyond our local area and work out how we can collaborate and create more opportunities and fulfilling experiences with anyone and everyone. Last one, number 4, taking advantage of quieter and colder months. Sid has leveraged off the local holiday homes in the area, especially in non-holiday periods when it gets a little bit colder and the rent is cheaper. He's built these relationships with certain owners in the area to provide them with a steady occupancy from his artists during those times. And what an amazing selling point to encourage people to come down the South Coast. Not only do you get to stay in a quieter and a more chilled atmosphere, but you get to do it at a really, really affordable price as well. And that's it, folks. Those were my key takeaways from this episode with Sid Green. Now, if I missed something or you got something a little bit different from this chat, I would absolutely love to hear from you. You can contact me via any of the social media platforms, in particular Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter by searching @Andy Dowling, or you can go over to the contact page at sellstarter.com.au and flick me a message via there. And now, before we wrap it up, as always, a massive thank you to everybody that supports this podcast. It means a hell of a lot to me, and it's great to see the audience building and building each and every episode. If you want to support this podcast more than just listening, which is more than enough, thank you, by the way, you can do so by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, on Whooshka, who are now supporting this podcast by hosting. Thank you very much to Corey and the team over at Whooshka. You can do that, but just listening and spreading the word means a hell of a lot. So if you know a business owner, you know someone that's about to escape the cubicle, or you know someone that wants to create a little bit of a side hustle and earn a little bit of extra money, please direct them my way and to the Self-Starter podcast. It means a hell of a lot. Until next fortnight, guys, thank you so much, and we'll speak soon. Bye-bye.